Welcome back to the programme. In an unprecedented move, British MPs have voted to seize control of Parliament's agenda in a bid to take over Brexit negotiations from Theresa May. This comes as a fresh blow to the embattled UK Prime Minister, who's facing growing calls to step down. 3 ministers have also resigned in the wake of the vote, adding to the long list of departures from the Cabinet.
I would like to congratulate the House for taking control. The government's approach has been an abject failure, and this House must now find a solution.
This House is seeking to find a way forward when the government has failed to provide leadership.
The honourable member for Twickenham said just now this was a constitutional innovation. I think he may have just rather underestimated the fact that, in fact, it is a constitutional revolution, and the House will come to regret it.
Where this government has failed, this House must, and I believe will, succeed.
In the tussle for control, the government was ultimately defeated by MPs in Westminster, who will now have a greater say over the next steps of Brexit. That includes a vote on alternatives to Theresa May's withdrawal agreement. Professor of European law Francesco Rizzuto says that the Prime Minister has badly mishandled Brexit.
I think this is really the final, or it should be the final nail in the coffin, I hate to use that term, of the government strategy. It's failed. Parliament, including lots of Conservatives, have decided that the way the government has been dealing with this, and the Prime Minister in particular, has led nowhere. But the immediate challenge that has to be confronted, well, it's twofold. One, will we participate in European elections? Because there's no way we're going to be leaving by the 22nd of May. God knows how the government's going to deal with what Parliament asks us to do. So there's that issue. And then, of course, the second issue is, well, who's the government? Who's the Prime Minister?
Now, some of Britain's biggest art galleries have refused large donations from a US trust over concerns regarding how the money was made. It's all connected to America's current opioid epidemic, as artist Polly Boyko explains.
Picasso once said that art cleanses the soul, but for large and sometimes dubious corporations, the tried and tested method of sponsoring art was a way of cleansing their image. Well, not anymore though. What does this, the US opioid crisis, which kills more than 100 people per day over in the US, have to do with London's National Portrait Gallery? The answer? The Sackler family. Their immense wealth comes from the sale of OxyContin, a widely used prescription painkiller that's stronger than morphine. Last year, a US Senate report accused the Sackler family's Purdue Pharma company of acting as cheerleaders for the opioids and contributing to the opioid crisis in America. But for years now, the Sackler family has also been a cheerleader and sponsor of the arts. Or was, until protests like these became more common. In 2017, British museums accepted over £7 million in donations from the Sackler Trust. London's Royal Academy of Arts has a Sackler wing, and there's a Sackler courtyard in the Victoria and Albert Museum. But the question of ethical funding is forcing an increasing number of arts institutions to reconsider where they get their money from. It's now emerged that London's National Portrait Gallery has returned a £1 million grant from the Sackler Trust. And the Tate Gallery and the South London Gallery have also said they won't be taking any more Sackler money. And then the Sackler Trust itself said it won't be making any more donations. That's been seen widely as a face-saving measure to avoid any more rejections. A number of art institutions have come under scrutiny for corporate sponsorships recently. Last month, campaigners occupied the British Museum in protest at its continued acceptance of funding from British Petroleum. The oil company, alleged to have lobbied for the war in Iraq, sponsored an exhibition of treasures from modern-day Iraq and Syria. The Tate Museum ended its relationship with BP back in 2016. And last summer, the Netherlands Van Gogh Museum stopped its relationship with Dutch oil company Shell. Both cases were presented as mutual decisions by the museums and oil companies, but they also came after intense pressure from campaigners. But when it comes to funding the arts, some say there's no such thing as clean money.
There is this gray area of if you have a lot of due diligence in the arts and you look very carefully, you'll find something a bit dodgy. Yeah, exactly. Multinationals, airlines, social media, bankers, people are slightly squeamish about them. Florentine bankers made the Renaissance possible.
For those visiting the museums or working outside them, the issue of so-called art washing is a tough call. The scrutiny over ethical donations couldn't come at a worse time for cash-strapped British arts institutions which have had their funding slashed in recent years. But there are those that say that in order for the arts to prosper, galleries simply can't afford to be picky.
That's the news this hour. I'll be back in around 30 minutes' time with more updates, but do stay with us for a documentary called The Blood is at the Doorstep, which is up next here on RT International.